Sir Ken Dodd, or Doddy, as we fondly called him, was one of Britain's favourite entertainers for an incredible 7 decades. The undisputed clown prince of comedy.
I think it'd be a good idea now if all the ugly ones came down and sat near the front. You have? Good. Well, listen,
Brandishing his trademark tickling sticks, Doddy was the nation's jester, inviting us into his surreal, whimsical world of laughter.
Geronimo!
As a performer, he was our last connection to a golden tradition of music hall and variety.
What a beautiful day for popping down to the town hall, chucking a bucket of whitewash over the pigeons and saying, "They are, how do you like it?" Oh.
And in the world of entertainment, Doddy was regarded as the best in the business.
Without doubt, one of the greatest comedians that this country's produced.
Ken Dodd is at the top of the comedy family tree.
The legend, he has to be the governor.
Ken Dodd, he was the greatest.
Father tells his son, he said, "I want you to have everything I've had, son. A vasectomy, a hernia, a neck brace."
Ken was a master of his craft, and everybody knew that.
I attended Ken's show as a kind of an act of pilgrimage. And he said, there's a 3-letter word that people should be thinking about when they see me, and that is joy.
He was the king of laughter, the greatest stage comic the country's ever seen.
Yeah, in Paris, all the chairs and tables are out on the street. In Liverpool, we call that eviction. But they do think.
A great outpouring of affection accompanied his passing in March 2018, when we bid farewell to the man who had made us laugh all our lives, the king of the Diddy Men.
You're a puppet.
The cookies.
Don't correct me, it's bad enough talking to myself.
Ken Dodd died in the house he was born in, having never moved from his modest knotty ash home in his 90 years. But over that lifetime, he rose to the very pinnacle of British show business, occupying a unique position as the nation's purveyor of happiness, a star with his own special style of hilarity and exuberance.
When I was born, the midwife held me up by my legs, slapped my face and punched my dad.
So who was the real Ken Dodd? For a performer with such a larger-than-life personality on stage, he was an intensely private man. But now, with unprecedented access to his personal archives and family home, we'll learn the full Ken Dodd story, told in his own words.
The private person, before they go on stage, might feel quite down. But once the music starts and you're on, something happens, you become another person.
And for the first time, his wife, Lady Anne, talks about life with Ken.
People do go through bad patches and problems, and that was ours.
His friends, family and fellow entertainers remember the Doddy they knew and loved.
He was so sincere and genuine, and he taught me a lot, and I'll be forever grateful to Ken for that.
And of course, we'll enjoy being tickled again by the laughter maker, who for over 70 years added to the gaiety of our nation with his joyful, infectious, life-affirming happiness. He brought social unrest in the 80s, but Liverpool's spirit remained undimmed. And a decade later, the city's confidence was back. But whatever the city's changing fortunes, from the middle of the last century until the second decade of this, Liverpool had one constant: Ken Dodd.
The people of Liverpool adored Doddy. If you're a special person and you're good to them, they will be so good to you, they will back you up to the hilt. And Doddy was what we call a rail scouser.
How proud I am to be a citizen of Liverpool and a member of the Merseyside family. I live in Merseyside, Liverpool in particular, because it's a wonderful city, full of people who are very, very full of enthusiasm. What's your name?
Eileen.
Eileen?
Eileen from Scam.
To the left or the right?
The first thing you're greeted with when you get off the train at Lime Street is a statue of Ken Dodd. And he was very, very good to the city. Scousers love it when people stay in Liverpool.
Some people ask, what was the special relationship between Ken and the people of Liverpool? And the answer is summed up in 3 words. He never left.
We loved the way he stayed with us.
If we walked round Liverpool, everybody would recognise him, and it was lovely. He's just so loved.
You could meet Ken in Church Street, bump into him, Marks and Spencer's, and he'd be talking to you. It didn't matter where you were. Go into the garage, he'd be there.
Walking down the road with my Uncle Ken was impossible. Someone would stop you. Hiya, Ken. Autograph, photograph, stop, chat. Walk another 2 yards. Hiya, Ken. And it just went on and on and on.
People would come up to him, all ages, and he'd have a remark for everybody, you know, and it didn't bother me, but it did take time. You couldn't just go in a shop. But it was lovely. It was nice, yes.
It's November 2018. 8 months after Ken's funeral brought his home city to a standstill. A further, permanent reminder of Liverpool's affection for its most celebrated entertainer is being unveiled, right at the centre of a building in which Ken spent many hundreds of hours, the Picton Reading Room in the Central Library. 5 miles due east of the library is where Ken's story began 90 years earlier in the Liverpool suburb of Knotty Ash, now part of Merseyside's urban sprawl. But in the 20s, it was a leafy rural village. In this house in 1927, Kenneth Arthur Dodd was born. He was to be the middle of 3 children. The family ethic was work hard and play hard. His mother, Sarah, was the rock who looked after the family and supported their every move, while Ken's father, Arthur, worked long hours as a coal merchant. But he loved a bit of fun and created a home that was full of excitement, adventure and laughter.
When you went to Nana and Grandad Dodd's house in Knotty Ash, it wasn't a visit, it was an adventure.
We had a marvellous childhood, just like just William. Loads and loads of fields and trees.
The place was buzzing with people. There was activities going on. The backyard had wagons. There was always dens being built, tree houses.
I seem to spend most of my childhood lighting fires and becoming a spy and writing in invisible ink.
His father was always telling jokes, and he had a great sense of humour.
A lot of people often say, who's your favourite comic? Well, it's my dad. Really? Definitely. He was the funniest man I ever knew.
And his parents would take the 3 of them to the Shakespeare Theatre of Varieties in Liverpool, and that's where he got the love of the glow of a theatre.
As a small boy, but it always seemed to me that the engine driver in a show was always the comedian. He was the top of the bill. So I wanted to be a comedian. Well, I couldn't do it right away because I was only about 7 or 8 years old, and I used to read these comics, The Wizard, The Hotspur, The Rover. One day in The Wizard, I read this advertisement. It said, fool your teachers, amaze your friends, send 6pence in stamps. So I did, and I got this book on how to become a ventriloquist, didn't I? Yes. You'll tell. And also, my father bought me this ventriloquial figure, and I started doing little concerts. My first was at an orphanage in Knotty Ash, where I live. My dad wrote the script, and that was my first show at about 8.
Ken naively named his first ventriloquist dummy Charlie Brown. Naive because the letter B is the hardest to say without moving your lips.
You must be very thirsty. Yes. So would you like a big bottle of brown beer and some brown bread and butter, or a shandy?
Shandy.
Good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, tonight...
As a teenager, Ken began playing local pubs and clubs, but performing not as himself, hiding instead behind an invented comic persona, Professor Yaffle Chuckabutty, operatic tenor and sausage knotter. Years later, on the television series The Good Old Days, Ken recreated part of his early act, which included lampooning the sounds of the orchestra and sending up serious singers.
Far away from a footlight's glare and dribbling into the sweet and scented air. It's funny. Of a quaint old Cornish shore.
By his 20s, Ken was performing under his own name, but not yet confident enough to earn his living from entertainment.
I mean, you were on the knock on the door, weren't you?
I was on the knocker, as you say, going round selling, pots and pans and tickling sticks. I think that's where the missus bit started. All my life, I've always sold things unseen of service to the public. That still happens, bro.
At the age of almost 27, Ken finally got himself an agent and gave up the day job.
I turned professional in 1954 at the Nottingham Empire, and the next week was Leeds, and the following week was Sunderland, and then up to the House of Terror, Glasgow Empire.
In the thriving world of 1950s variety theatre, Ken knew it was important to develop a unique image, to stand out from the other comedians.
I get stage fright very easily. In the first days, I had to have some ice to go, oh, right, oh. And one night, it was in Norwich, at the Carlton. I was doing this, and it actually stood on it like this. Is it good? The hair, the teeth, the fingers, the eyes, they're all trademarks to make you different than any other humorist, different than any other comic. You have to be different.
I'm going to say something now, ladies and gentlemen, that you're going to be flabbergasted. Really, you will. You'll say, my, we can hardly believe that. I wasn't a pretty baby. My. Oh, come on, be a bit more convincing, will you?
Ken knew that he couldn't just rely on a funny look. There was serious work to be done too.
Now, my granddad was one for, well, if you want to do this type of thing, you have to learn, you have to educate yourself about the craft. And to do so, the best way of learning is to start in the library.
He just loved books. He loved reading. He started going to the library at a very early age for research. Books on comedy, humour, laughter, and the psychology of humour.
I used to come here every day of the week, months on end, and just sit here and read, look in the index and look up the word comedy, comedians, clowns, and I used to sit down there and read and read and read.
He studied his comedy, wasn't he? He used to read philosophy, the philosophy of laughter, what made you laugh.
Freud said that a laugh is a sudden explosion of psychic energy. Of course, the trouble with Freud was he never played second house Friday night at Glasgow Empire.
He learned a lot, my Uncle Ken, from books, but it was my granddad that started teaching him how to write scripts, how to perform.
His father got him the first doll, made all his props when he started up.
It says, Dear Ken Dodd.
As a young performer, Ken was on a quest for perfect comedy, but with guidance and assistance from his female companion.
Ken's first fiancée was Anita. I think she was an ex-nurse. She came with him to every show. She was his biggest fan, wonderfully loyal, and she used to mark his jokes out of 10. Well, that one went really well in Aberdeen. That one goes well in Liverpool. And so he knew from then which jokes to do when he went back to those towns again. Sadly, Anita died very young, and Ken, of course, was broken-hearted.
Well, I arrived down here in Liverpool, 61. Liverpool was the place, no two ways about it. It was a place in Britain where everything was happening. It was just explosion of talent here in the city. Ken Dodd was flying high. I mean, he never stopped working.
They had this big variety show in 1961. There must have been 15, 16 acts. And Ken always used to tell the story. He was getting changed in the dressing room to go on stage. And he said, this arm just appeared round the corner with a business card and the voice. And Ken used to do the voice brilliantly. I can't. But Ken used to say, the voice said, someone said, if we give you our card, you might be able to get us some bookings. And it was John Lennon.
What's he supposed to be doing, though? I mean,
Well, John, he's a peasant. He's an evil son.
John?
Sorry. Thingy. He's...
The Beatles admired him tremendously. You can see on that 15-minute interview, they are looking at him with respect and almost awe. Because, of course, he was a Liverpudlian hero before they were.
John is a courtier.
You can see in Lennon's face, especially, the recognition that the wordplay is going on at super speed. And he really admires that.
Have you no ambitions to form a group yourself?
Love to, with the boys. The only thing is I'd have to change my name, you see. I'd have to have a name like Cliff or Rock, something earthy.
Yeah, well, what about that, fellow?
Yeah. Eh?
Sod.
They were just so charming. They were interested in each other. And I remember watching John looking at Ken because Ken said, because you're quite humorous, aren't you, John? And John was nodding. I found it absolutely charming, that bit of that interview.
You can tell a joke in Manchester and they don't get it in London.
Really?
They can't hear it.
The Beatles shared Ken's love of comedy, but he also shared their love of music.
Promises, just empty promises.
He was very clever, wasn't he? Because he had two careers. He was the clown, he was the jester, and then he also had this wonderful singing voice, and he found some fantastic songs.
Promises were broken promises.
Ken Dodd was a serious singer in the sense that when he sang his ballads, he wasn't kidding, he wasn't joking.
Now the one you kept your promise to.
I think what was so good about Doddy's singing was that the songs he sang, they were absolutely lovely.
I still love you.
It really was a lovely voice. And he was obviously incredibly musical. I loved hearing him sing. I've got a CD in the car, which if I feel like being cheered up, I put it on.
There was a massive audience for this ballad material. It wasn't kids, it was the people who had been kids only the previous decade.
Love is like a violin.
Love is Like a Violin was Ken Dodd's first top 40 hit, 1960.
Soft and sweet.
I first ever met him in the 61 Christmas season, and I was one of the dancers when his song Love is Like a Violin was in the hit parade. When he went into this song, this enormous violin that went from one side of the stage to the other, upon which was draped 2 or 3 of us girls in ballet costumes. And one night, I just gently slid off with a great thump onto the ground in the middle of Love is Like a Violin. So I made a bit of an impression then. That's how I first met him. Fell in love with his eyes. I thought he was very good looking. He always had big teeth, that didn't bother me. He just had a gentle way, a gentle, old-fashioned romantic.
Girls, ladies, you are now sitting in the Garden of Eden, where all this passion and romance started, where Eve said to Adam, "Should you love me?" He said, "Well, who else is there?" It was only you and the snake. And frankly, so...
Traditionally, northern comedians had tended to stay performing in the north, where they knew and understood their audiences. Ken realised, though, that if his career was to make the big leap to the next level, he needed to conquer the south. It was a huge risk, but nowhere would he make a greater impact than at the most prestigious variety theatre in the world.
When Ken came to London, some people said, he'll never do it, he'll never crack it here.
Ladies, I've got so much to give. Oh, you're gonna get it too. I'm gonna make you have it. No. I'm not wheeling this lot back to Liverpool.
I'd seen Doddy in Liverpool. I'd seen him paralysing them, and they said he's coming to Palladium. And there it is. The most famous theatre in the world, bar none. Sinatra, the Palladium. Sammy Davis, the Palladium. Hope, Crosby, Nureyev. And it worked for Doddy.
Northerners always make you welcome. They'll always invite you back to their homes for a fight. Or set the whippet on you, or stick a ferret up the left leg of your trousers.
I think he had 3 sensational seasons here, but the first one was in his pomp. I was on at the Talk of the Town at the time in '65, and it was just lovely. He crashed every record here in 40 weeks. It was sold out.
Put the kettle on, Mother. Aye, it suits you.
I've never heard laughter like it. It was all for Ken Dodd.
By Jove, I was a clever baby. When I was 6 months old, I could walk. I had to, the bottom fell out of the pram.
I came to London in 1965. I was scratching a living as a sort of junior reviewer, and I went to the Palladium to see Ken Dodd. He filled the stage week after week after week through the whole of that riotous summer. I'd never seen anyone who had such abundance. You felt he was super alive on stage, supercharged, had more energy than most normal human beings would do in a lifetime.
In May 1965, Doddy's Here at the Palladium was the hottest ticket in London. The Beatles were at #1 with Ticket to Ride, and Bill Shankly's Liverpool team were in the FA Cup final.
Ken was a Red. We got through to the FA Cup final, and the night before, we were down in London. The boss says, right, boys, we're going to the Palladium. Doddy's on. Cup final teams will be very nervous before a big game like that. But we're in the Palladium, Ronan, laughing at Ken. And that was our preparation for the cup final. And it set us up for what was then to be a big win the following day at Wembley.
Liverpool were lasting better than their opponents. St John made no mistake this time. And now the cup was theirs to take home and make the Mersey beat as it's never done before.
Ken was riding the 60s Mersey wave. After the success of his record-breaking Palladium run, he was given what every entertainer coveted, his very own BBC television series.
And I was down on the beach, and a beautiful girl came up to me and she said, "Hello, handsome, can you tell me the way to the opticians?" So
Ken was at the top of his game and could now attract comedy's biggest names, like television's Steptoe and Son.
All the professionals play this way. Really? These clubs with the... You didn't tell me Sean Connery was playing...
What's the matter with Bugs Bunny, then?
Tell you what, let's see if there's any wishbones. And then we can all make a wish.
He also attracted the best writers, up-and-coming stars of the future like Michael Palin and Terry Jones, 4 years before Monty Python took to the air. 1965 was also Ken's most successful year in the pop charts.
Tears for souvenirs are all you've left me.
The great peak of his success was with Tears. Tears was this monstro hit. This record was #1 for 5 weeks.
I just can't believe.
1965, a year of so many great records. And if you look at the top 40 when he's #1, there's Unchained Melody by the Righteous Brothers, Like a Rolling Stone by Bob Dylan, Help by the Beatles is on, you know. I mean, it's incredible.
Turn our tears of regret once more.
It was the #3 best-selling single of the 60s in this country, topped only by 2 Beatles records.
By now, Ken was a major star, drawing huge audiences to his live stage shows all over the country. But there was one group he felt he hadn't yet appealed to.
I was doing okay with adults, you know, around the music halls. And then I found a new audience, the summer season and the pantomime audiences, with children. So I had to find a point of communication to talk to the little diddy people.
And his answer was the Diddy Men. Ken began doodling sketches on how they might look.
I used to have a little hobby of cartooning, and all my men all came out looking like my Uncle Jack. He loved his pints, so he always had a big tummy and always wore a bowler hat, and he had little legs. They used to call him the Diddy Man. It became a Dodd family word. Anything that was quaint and lovable became Diddy this and Diddy that. So the Diddy Men were really modelled on him.
We are the Diddy Men, itty bitty Diddy Men.
Next, he gave them voices, first on radio, and then on the record, the song of the Diddy Men.
I'd heard the single, We Are the Diddy Men, and I thought it would be interesting to make string puppets of them. So I went to see Ken, and he was very encouraging on that and said, yeah, go ahead and make a puppet. I took in the puppet to show him, which he liked, and he said, well, let's see what reaction we get from an audience.
I'd like to introduce you now to another famous Diddy man from Knotty Ash, a very, very aristocratic Diddy man.
The first time a Diddy Man was actually seen by the public was on Ken's BBC One show.
We're full of Diddy joys, we make a giant Diddy noise.
The reaction was so good, the Diddy Men soon had their own series for children.
When we were working in the studio, which was filmed in Manchester, they built this fantastic Diddy village. Each character had his own house. They were probably about 5 foot high, some of them, and I would lean over the back of the houses and work the puppets. All the voices were recorded by Ken. He played all the characters.
Agent Haricott, why are you standing under that umbrella? I'm an undercover agent.
Harry, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous.
Why did you say it twice?
Because I'm a double agent. Very good. Get off.
He was very professional, but he wasn't the best timekeeper. We would be on set and ready to go at 10 o'clock in the morning. Meanwhile, Ken would be fast asleep in bed in Knotty Ash. So we would film all the sequences with the puppets and the close-ups on our own, and then he would come in maybe 2 o'clock, and we'd have to reshoot all the ones where we had him with the puppets. He was never exactly on time.
Almost 50 years later, Roger is reunited with his Diddy men, who now belong to theatre impresario and collector Nick Thomas.
The joy of animating these puppets is, A, they're light, but they're so alive and they feel real. You know, their little faces and bodies, it's easy to bring them alive. They're wonderful. They are a puppeteer's dream to work.
This one is Harry Cott. He's the yokel from Somerset. He normally has a pitchfork. He's quite cute and he's got a very distinctive walk. And this is Nigel Ponsonby Smallpiece, who was sort of the official leader of the Diddy Men. He had his own car, and the Diddy car was actually a replica of a full-size car, which was used in the pilot.
This is Dickie Mint, the most Doddy of the Diddy Men, because he looks like Ken Dodd. And I think he's probably the most famous one.
So it's quite interesting, after all these years, seeing them again and actually working them.
I think it's wonderful.
Ken's first steps in show business had been as a ventriloquist. Now he made his mini-me, Dickie Mint, a key part of his act, and Dickie stayed for the next 50 years.
I'd like you to say, I'd like to hear you say, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled pepper. A peck of pickled pepper Peter Piper picked.
So would I.
Dickie Mint would be in the last segment of the show, and then something would come quite new to him in his mind, and the doll would seem to say something to him and give Ken a shock. Of course, it's all coming from Ken. It's quite incredible how he was doing the two voices and actually creating a new bit. The doll would say something and Ken would laugh, and it's ridiculous. Ad-libs. The doll would have ad-libs. Quite, you know, unbelievable to watch.
Paul Daniels, a magician who's so small, the rabbit keeps dragging him back into the hat. Yes. When you're motoring, when you're really on a roll, you're in 5th gear, and you're really... It's all going. You don't really know what you're saying. This is a prop basket, do you know, Paul? You would probably be born in one of these, a much smaller one, of course. This, I've stood on the stage many times and heard myself telling jokes I've never heard of. I haven't heard that one before. I stand and I go, I don't know what I've said, but it's, and it won't have it. Oh, that's quite good there.
Now, of course, you're a professional salesman of laughter, so you're an expert on it.
Oh, thank you very much.
So Ken was at his creative best when he was given free rein, which is why he sometimes found the technical challenges of television so frustrating.
We've been doing some extramural studies. Oh, that's charming. Oh, that's all.
Got to start from the top. Ladies and gentlemen, just got a slight technical hitch. The captain's down again.
Thanks for nothing.
It's still on the air. On television, you're just performing to a set of wires or some, a camera, or probably they say, well, don't look over there, look over there. Oh, yeah, why am I doing that? Well, it's better camera shot. Oh, really?
Television cameras possibly put a barrier between Ken and his audience.
You love playing to a live audience?
Yes, a live theatre, it's a one-to-one experience. There's not all this scrap iron in the way. You can get to them. There's my audience up there. By Jove, Mrs.
As soon as he went on the stage and the lights went on, he transformed. He was just the best when it was a live audience and packed theatre, and he really just let go.
I've been tangoed!
I'd say Ken Dodd was like a comic whirlwind. He didn't sort of walk on stage. He erupted on the stage. He made you laugh before he'd said anything.
He was eccentric.
Ken would often come on in some outrageous costume.
There's a wonderful atmosphere in here tonight, just like a clinic. This...
The conical hat.
Crazy with his hair sticking up.
He looked a lot like my great aunt.
His teeth were going like that the whole time, you know.
That clown-like ability.
Yellow suit, banging a bass drum.
Silent night.
Old pots and pans.
It was just outrageous.
I like these subtle bits, don't you?
Surreal.
At one time, there was only Noel Coward and me doing this sort of stuff. Oh. But once he'd packed the accordion up, that was it. I was in like a shot.
This is the moggy skin coat. It's pretty well worn, as you can see. I actually made this many, many years ago. These are just cardboard. I took it to an ordinary cleaners once. Oh, we can't do that. Oh, I can't guarantee that. No, that can't be done. I said, it's a moggy skin coat, you know. Beg your pardon. So anyway, I just took it to the laundrette.
Genuine moggy skin, this lady. It's moggy skin, pussycats. Took 28 moggies to make this. All Toms.
When I think, he used to wear this all year round. And sometimes he's got a suit on, obviously, shirt and everything, and this on top. And he'd say, oh, I only wear it for 10 minutes. But it was his middle spot. Sometimes he might have it on half an hour. And then this is the hat that goes with it. Tickling sticks, of course. The idea of having a tickling stick was having something in your hands at all. When you first go on stage, you must have something. This is the procedure. A lot of training for this.
It's got Naughty Ash written on it. I don't really know what to do with it or what it is, but I just love it.
Ticklemas Eve. Ticklemas Eve, girls, and tomorrow's Ticklemas Day.
I've had it in my house, giving people a tickle for a number of years.
He had one tickling stick that would nearly reach the circle. Well, he'd come on with that and twirl it round. Geronimo! How would you like this through your letterbox of a morning?
Oh, madam, look at the size of it.
Full thrust. By George.
And all the old women were screaming.
It always blows your hat off, does it? Another feeling. Oh, have to get rid of this now. Yeah.
At his height, there was no other comedian could follow him. You wouldn't want to either, because he'd laugh them dry.
Are there any farmers in here tonight? Any farmers in? Yes. I thought so. You can always tell when there's farmers in when they're showing their wives to their seats. You say, come on, there you go, come on.
No one could deliver his jokes like he did.
I was reared up on powdered foods. Powdered egg, powdered milk, powdered potato. Every time I sneezed, I disappeared in a cloud of dust.
The sheer number of jokes was ridiculous.
Well, actually, Jim, I have had my voice trained. They put newspapers down for it. And I do mostly one-liners. They say an elephant never forgets. I've never had a birthday card from one of you.
Bang, a punch of it, you know. Bang, next one.
Bang, bang, bang.
My brother-in-law, he's crackers. You know what he did last week? My brother-in-law, he did one of these loft conversions. People in the flat above went balmy.
And if the first gag didn't get you, the second did. If that didn't, the third would. And he would just go at you.
You know my little Uncle Willie? He's married to my big Auntie Nellie. He has to kneel up in bed to see if it's breaking daylight. Well, I try to get as many laughs as I can in the time available. I could be a villain. I could sue. I could do some villainous things, you know. At the end of the month, I always go down to the bottom of the garden, wait until the tortoise gets there, then turn it round the other way. If we can get 7 laughs a minute, we're okay, we're motoring. This is an educational show tonight. This is an educational show. When you go out of here tonight, you say, well, that's taught me a lesson.
Some of his material was quite old-fashioned, but it was the way he told them.
I've been like this all day, honestly. 5 o'clock this morning, love, 5 o'clock, I flung the bedroom windows open, climbed in, I thought, by Joe.
People don't realise just how hard Ken Dodd actually worked. The mechanics of his act, the preparation of his act.
The cat's eyes in the centre of the road. The cat's eyes in the centre. This is rather pleasant, Liz. The cat's eyes.
It was a chaotic performance.
You know, he's here, he's there, he's saying this, saying that, going off on a tangent. But everything was perfectly structured.
And that was a Yorkshireman who invented that, you know, the cat's eyes by accident. One night, you see this Yorkshireman, he's driving home at night in his big posh car in the dark, and suddenly, in the car's headlamps, he sees his cat's eyes coming towards him. Now, had the cat been walking the other way, it would have invented a pencil sharpener. But there you are. And these are little things.
We looked upon him as a professor of comedy.
Will anybody laugh tonight?
He treated it like a science.
Because some people never laugh, you know.
He was an expert.
Some people have no sense of humour. There are some people who are devoid. Why the hell they all have to turn up in one lumpy and
His timing was perfect.
Holding a gag back, the double tag on a gag. Is that the bump? Yes, but that was only her sister.
I refuse to tell ethnic jokes. This fellow went into a pet shop in Liverpool last week and he said, "Have you got any of them there pushery cats? What is it? Have you any of the payment off little green and yellow fellas?" He was from West Liverpool. A joke is like a beautiful watch. If you take the back off, there's balance, there's rhythm, there's timing, and that's what a joke is. It's like a little play, all on its own, and you mustn't have one word too many, and you mustn't have one word too little. Did you know that if the Earth was to suddenly stop spinning now, the Taj Mahal would hit you right in the back of the neck? You did? Oh, well, tonight...
I'll never forget he told me, always remember, you don't tell a joke, you sing a joke. A joke must have a rhythm and a beat of its own, just like a song.
Opera is very confusing. Opera is where a man gets stabbed and instead of bleeding, he sings.
You could take a very ordinary gag and turn it into something special just by a look, cutting out a couple of words. He was good at editing.
And your father disciplines his family. His teenage daughter. "Wipe that muck off your face, madam. It's never bothered your mother being ugly."
Every night he'd try half a dozen, 10 new gags out.
New jokes written on his hand, scrawled on his hands. Both hands were covered with jokes. So we had jokes about things that happened in the news that day.
And some that you think are going to be hilarious don't work, so you try it another way. And some that don't expect to take off go bang.
Two ladies talking, one said, "That man. That man, from the moment I met him, it was moan, moan, whinge, whinge, cry, cry, swear, swear." So when did you meet him? Said I ran over him in the car.
Anne monitored Ken's performance from the side of the stage every night, and it was her role to keep the whole show on the road.
You couldn't underestimate the part that Anne played in Ken's life. He wouldn't admit it, but I'm telling you now, he would have been absolutely lost without her.
Anne, to Ken, was his tour manager, his stage manager, his production manager, his tour travel coordinator. She did everything, as well as being psychiatrist, coach, comforter. He didn't make any move without her.
Trip to Nashville, USA. In fact, we'll go to our own naughty Nashville. And here we have the Grand Ole Opry.
Not only did she send the invoicing and drive a car and carry the bags and sell the tickling sticks, she was in the show as well. 2 spots, no less. And she was absolutely brilliant.
She was his right hand. It really should have been Doddy and Anne, you know. She was there everywhere. She got him ready. She made, even though he was always late, she made sure he always got there in the end.
Obviously, she was his partner, ultimately his wife, but she was much more than that. She was his driver. The hours she must have clocked up, because Ken would insist on going back to Liverpool if humanly possible, and Anne would often have to drive him back in the dead of night.
Anne was extraordinary, because it takes a hell of a lot, you know, to carry 100 tickling sticks and 100 diddy men, and plus the takings and everything that's used in the show, and get it all in the van. It was hard bloody graft, actually.
We'd have to unload the cars, do a sound check, make sure he comes in from signing things, do your sound check, everybody else do their sound checks. Ken would say, "Please try and keep me half an hour piece before I go on." Imagine this on a much bigger dressing table. That would stand up against the mirror. This inside box is from the 50s. It was his first makeup box. It's all broken and everything, but it's like the old tradition. You don't throw anything like that away. You're attached to them. I said, "No, there's nothing left in that." "Was a bit left in there?" "No," because he liked the shade or whatever. Good old-fashioned grease paint, Leishner carmine red. And he used to put a little dot in the corner of each eye. It stops He's looking as though he's squinting. But he put quite heavy makeup on. He would do it all himself. And he'd just get himself sorted. But he's thinking all the time. I used to do the announcements as well. Then I'd go and get made up, make sure he's had his cup of tea, put him on. Right, he's into it. I'll get ready for my bit if I'm on next. Get his soup ready, interval, lager. We always carried cans of lager because you can't be sure the draft lager's going to be a nice one. And then start again the second half. It was just all go. It was wonderful, though. I loved it. I was bossy. Just do that.
I would describe her as a wonderful nurse for every part of him and a good companion.
So close to him, so loyal to him, his confidant, his advisor, although he probably would never admit that, his best friend, his everything.
I can put my makeup on and drive the men insane.
By the time we'd done all the packing up to get away from the theatre, to be quite honest, it could be 2 hours after you've come off stage. Occasionally loading a car in the pouring rain or the snow, and I climb on a little stool to put it all at the bits that go in the roof. And I do, and this is absolutely true. In recent years, I remember thinking, oh my goodness, what am I doing this? I'm old enough to be retired, I couldn't be doing this, and he's well into retirement age. And then I think, one of these days I won't be doing this and I'll miss it.
First 30 seconds is the most important part of the act. You have to get through to the audience right away. I think actors call it establishing rapport. You build a bridge between yourself and the audience.
No, we really have, ladies, we really have got an absolutely quality audience here this evening, ladies and gentlemen.
It was a masterclass, the way he manipulated an audience, the way he brought them in.
The audience waited for me outside. That was a bit unnerving. And they carried me shoulder high down the main road. I said, you mustn't treat me like a hero. He's a hero, you're over the canal.
You didn't captivate an audience. You captured an audience. They were trapped within their own cage of laughter.
The audience here this evening have all been specially selected, especially from people who can't afford to buy new clothes. And this... Apologies. It's like performing at a rummage sale.
He feeds, like a vampire really, he feeds off the energy of the audience and it energises him.
An outrageous day for ramming... Oh, no, we can't do that. Yes, why not? Good.
I've never done the same show twice, because every audience is different, a different permutation of personalities. I am an intellectual entertainer. Well, of course, you knew that when you book the seats. I mean, what you see is what you get. But no, we never return money, madam. Some audiences are harder, if you like, than others, and you can see where the audience is quiet, where the audience are, quite lively. So you have to coax these people and just keep them on the boil. Would you hold this for me, dear? Yes. Just sit down. Just relax. Hold it to your person. Thank you. Region Santa Lucia. Mossad. You got it upside down. No, it's me. No, it's I've got to read it. Laughter is inside everybody. You just have to coax them, and sometimes you have to be well-mannered, and other times you can be quite cheeky.
The music hall, where Harry Champion invented the sparking plug, and where big strapping girls in black tights. Eh?
Because he could be quite rude sometimes. Nobody was ever upset. They were always utterly delighted.
Control yourself!
I love when you really got them rolling. Laughter is the most beautiful sound in the world.
Love me with all of your heart. That's all I want to love.
I think Ken's act was a form of love, really.
Not at all.
His love for his audience was palpable.
Give me all your kisses.
He wanted them to love him, he wanted to love them. I once said that his act was like a structured orgy, in that we were all together in this frenzied celebration.
Oh, when you're near me.
Joy, ecstasy, happiness.
The terrifying thing is the fear of rejection. If an audience rejects you, that's terrible. There's part of you that is still a child. It is asking for appreciation, asking for approval, asking for love.
Despite all his success, the performer's fear of rejection made Ken cling onto the security of home life back in Knotty Ash.
Do you live in the same house that you were born in?
Yes, yes.
Have you always lived there?
Yes.
You lived there with your father and mother?
Yes.
His father lived till he was 80, and he was here. It was still his father's house, but they got on very well. He'd be Ken Dodd the performer, Ken Dodd the private man.
You're two people, you see. You're Ken Dodd, the ordinary fellow from Knotty Ash, and there's another one, there's a Ken Dodd who is on the stage. He's quite different than me, honestly. Totally different man.
He wasn't a typical show-busy person.
I think the idea of a celebrity lifestyle, I think it would shock him to death. It'd be far too expensive.
What do you spend your money on?
Books. Mostly books, I think.
He was a prolific reader. He loved his books. He'd read, and he'd read, and he'd read. That was Ken.
We had a very normal life at home. A typical day would be probably pretty much like anybody's. He would be a late riser. He'd eat breakfast late, and he always used to say I was a good cook. I didn't think I was particularly, but he did like my cooking. He liked my pea soup. He used to do hot pots and what we call a brown stew on the top. My mother used to get a wonderful flavour. I didn't quite make it, but he liked it, as long as I didn't tell him what was in it. He didn't like garlic in anything. That was a big point. No garlic. He didn't cook at all. He brewed tea all day. He'd sit in his corner and be ringing up script writers and working scripts out.
He was a telly addict as well. He loved the television. You daren't ring up when Flogget was on. Oh, he loved Flogget. And when the horse racing was on, he'd watch the horse racing as well.
And home life was shared with other companions too.
Where there was Ken, there was a dog. Ken without a dog was like having your dinner without spuds.
He loved dogs, yes. He'd always had dogs. Even as a child, they had dogs.
The dogs went everywhere with them and were much loved.
Rufus has been on the road. Pippin was on the road. Marky, Boodle. Some theatres used to put in their contract, no dogs, no dogs. And the agent we had at the time, he once wrote on one contract, no dog, no Dodd.
When you'd see Ken coming off stage and into the dressing room, the dogs would go absolutely berserk with joy at greeting him off stage. It was a joy to watch.
Sit and you get your wages. Been to your bargaining lesson? Oh. I'd come in and I'd say, what did you think of the show tonight? And you'd say, rough. Well, this is my best pal. All dogs are beautiful because I think they give all the affection that a lot of human beings could learn a lesson from. The father, when he comes home from the pub on a Sunday afternoon. Oh, no. Where's my pal? Where's my little doggy pal? Where's the only friend I've got in this house? Where's my dinner? She's your best pal, nicked it off the table half an hour ago.
In 1974, Ken raised funds for the Liverpool Royal Court Theatre by staging a marathon joke session over 3 hours long. Soon, audiences would claim that would turn into a nightly occurrence.
All I knew about Ken was Ken does incredibly long shows.
I do have a reputation of running a few seconds over, yes.
A show could be 5 hours.
I don't like these long shows, do you? I think 5 or 6 hours of Ken Dodd is enough for anybody.
I will always maintain he stayed on a little bit too long. All round the country, there's comics going, a little bit.
You're under stress, I'm under stress. I don't know what I'm under stress for. I'm the only one who knows what time the thing's going to finish here tonight. And I don't want to depress you.
You could become a headliner, that's a 45-minute show. You do your first Edinburgh show, that's 60 minutes. Then you start playing theatres, that'll be a 90-minute, maybe 2-hour show. And really, that's where it stops. And then Ken does that in the first half.
There's one thing about my shows, folks, you always go home in the daylight.
We'd been on for 2.5 hours in the first half, and there was an old couple going out. And the husband was saying to the wife, oof, that was well worth the money, that show. I said, excuse me, that's only the interval.
Ken would be at the Blackpool Grand. He'd do his Sunday concert at the Grand. I would go across to Skegness, which is total opposite side of the country, do my show, 2-hour show, take me an hour to pack the gear up, then it'd take me another 2 hours to drive back to Blackpool, and I would still be back in time to see another hour of Ken.
Me and my two friends, we watched him for, I think, an hour and a half, and there was a big Champions League football match, so we went and watched that, had a curry, came back and watched another hour of the show, and that's genuinely true.
There's people think people have died. My mother's missing. And the police would say, yeah, she wasn't at the Ken Dodd show, was she? They say, yeah, well, he's still on.
It's very hurtful, ladies and gentlemen, this rumour going round. You say, when you go to see a Ken Dodd show, you have to take sandwiches in a thermos flask. They do a wonderful breakfast here.
People who came to Ken's shows, they did bring sandwiches and flasks of tea because they knew and they'd been before.
This is an experience. When you leave here tonight, you'll know what a hostage situation is really like.
You can see people. I went to see him. Bloody hell. I was in there for a week.
People would miss last buses. He was known for that.
50% of this audience are all optimists. They're the ones who book taxis for 12:20.
And wasn't he referred to as the patron saint of cab drivers because he finished so late?
This is a long show, this. This is like one of those long-haul flights, so by rights you should all be wearing special socks. But
the only way they got him off, they told him he was going to have to pay the wages in the overtime. We can't have that. He'd be right off. Oh, dear, he knew the value of a pound.
And it's amazing how I can shorten it down when you know there's a massive overtime bill coming up. He can shorten it.
all audiences, they love to feel they're getting that little bit extra. It's a shame, really, to break up the party.
I started saying a few years ago, shorter time, longer life. You're killing yourself. You must take it a bit more easy. You don't need to do so long. It's about enjoying myself.
He never wanted to come off stage.
I think he was at home, here.
I don't have to do it. No, I don't have to.
So why do you do it, Ken?
Because I love it. There's no feeling like it.
He needed it. He needed that adoration. He wasn't Ken when he wasn't working.
The private person, before they go on stage, might feel quite down and not feel like being the comedian at all. But once the music starts and you're on, something happens. You become another person.
I remember him saying, there is nothing quite like standing on a stage. And in that moment, there is this extraordinary communion between the audience and the comedian. And then they all go. And then you're left. And you're on your own. And I think Ken felt that aloneness.
He enjoyed what he did, the love he was getting. And I suppose once the lights went out and he went back to his dressing room, it was a come down. It's just dark out there.
I always like to do things different. I used to walk backwards to school, just to see if it could be done. I've still got the lump on the back of my head to prove it. Backwards. This is the playground of the infant school. This was my favourite subject, playtime. That and singing. Singing in the choir of St John's Church.
You see, one of the things a lot of the public who just saw him as a comic, really, that never realised he was quite a religious bloke.
He was a deeply spiritual man who worshipped in church regularly.
I would say to anyone who has a troubled mind, pray and you will receive help, you will receive strength.
There was a traumatic episode in Ken's very early life which led to his firmly held Christian beliefs.
Lynn, do you remember this one? Ryan. Now, this is just after Ken was very poorly with double pneumonia. He was only 2, and it was critical. In those days, there was no drugs to treat you with, and he wasn't expected to live that evening.
They didn't think he'd survive. They really didn't. The doctors said, well, if this night will make or break, but be prepared for the worst. And he did survive. And thank God he did.
Is that where his faith came from?
Yeah. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I think this is probably where his faith stemmed from. I always remember he used to carry a picture, the light of the world, Jesus with the lamp at the door. And it used to be just a little folded picture he always carried.
And all his life, he's always said, I have been blessed. He certainly did have this strong faith, this belief.
I used to say I was lucky, but as you go through life, you realise you make your own luck. So now, no, I'm definitely blessed.
I think his faith shines through the fact that he was not a cruel comedian. He never, ever wanted to put people down. He wanted only to tell stories that made people laugh.
A thing that he said to me when I met him, he says, there's a three-letter word that people should be thinking about when they see me, and that is joy.
We're the greatest, aren't we, lads? Yes. And who confirms it? Our children know it. Our children, three little lads talking. He said, my dad's the greatest. No, my dad's the greatest. First they said, my dad's the fastest down on earth. He said, no, my dad's the fastest. He said, no, my dad's the fastest down on earth. He said, how fast is your dad? He said, my dad, he's so fast, he said, you could fire an arrow from a bow like Robin Hood. Twang! He said, my dad would run after that arrow, and before he hit the target, my dad would catch the arrow like that. And the second he said, my dad's faster than that. My dad's so fast you could fire a bullet from a gun, bang, to a target a mile away. And as the bullet left the gun, my dad would be after that bullet, faster than the speed of sound. And before that bullet hit the target, my dad would catch the bullet in his teeth. And the third lad said, my dad's faster than that. He said, how fast your dad? He said, my dad works for Liverpool Council. And he said, he finishes work at 5:30. He's in the house at 2 o'clock. Faster than light. Thank you. The most.
Crowds gathered outside Liverpool Magistrates' Court to greet the comedian whose theme tune is Happiness.
In 1989, Ken's whole world was rocked when the Inland Revenue investigated his tax affairs, and the case against him went to court.
I think the tax trial must have been agony for Ken. It must have been hell for him to go through.
It wasn't an easy time. People do go through bad patches and problems, and that was ours. He would have his own cries for help to cope with it. I think we boosted each other. When he was feeling particularly low, I said, well, we're just going to get through this. You know, I'm here. You're there. We'll do it. And good help from professional people who got on with their job.
Ken engaged the services of one of the most respected defence lawyers in Britain, and the case was heard in a Liverpool court.
We just had to work through it. We had to tell him all the details we had to. He said, you need to work at this, tell me everything I want, all the information I want, this, that and the other. You find out your best friends. A lot of supporters, a lot of wonderful supporters.
He said, I don't know if you heard, I've got this trial coming up. He said, would you come and speak for me? I said, I honestly don't know if you're innocent or guilty of this, but all I can do is do what they call a character witness thing. So he said, that'll do, young man. And it got a terrific reaction from the jury.
After a 23-day trial, Ken was found not guilty.
He was acquitted on all accounts, and that's that. At one stage, after it, he said, you know, I haven't had a happy day for 3 years. And that was heartbreaking. To me, that was absolutely heartbreaking.
Thank goodness, thank God it was all okay. I don't think Ken would have survived. If he'd have had to go inside, it would have been terrible.
It must have haunted him for a long time.
Sometimes when you're up against it, I think everybody gets their share of tough times. But I'm very grateful that I have something in here. I think you'd call it courage. I think that when I've been down, something gets very, very determined there that it's not going to beat me. and I won't let it beat me. 200 years ago, this balmy MP, he's sitting along there in Westminster one afternoon, he's got nothing to do. If you know, he thinks I know, he said. I know. I'll invent income tax. I'll invent income tax. And so he did, 200 years ago. In those days, it was tuppence in the pound. I thought it still was.
The late 1980s and early 90s was a difficult time for many mainstream comedians. Alternative comedy was dominant on television, but Ken carried on perfecting his craft in theatres up and down the country.
Dogs have a very, very highly sensitive sense of smell. You wouldn't think so, some of the things they sniff. But it's... Hey? Aren't you glad we don't have to do that? Hey? Oh, dear. No, I much prefer shaking hands. This, Hello, Phil. How are you? That's as far as I want to go. This... I don't want to get involved any further than that.
Satisfying thing of all.
This was a mega success. Big, big success. And this is... I've reinvented Ken Dodd again. Thank goodness I've been able to do this for 40 years.
The critical reaction to the show was massive and marked the beginning of a renaissance in Ken's career. In the following years, he amassed acclaim and awards, although there was one honour which took a little longer to come.
I think it was local people that started a petition off about, you know, why hadn't Doddy had a knighthood? And the signatures grew and grew and grew until in the end, you know, they had to give him a knighthood. I mean, he deserved it, didn't he?
And I just gave him this official-looking letter. I said, oh, there's a letter for you there. I don't know what it is. I'll leave you to open it. And then I came back and I said, what was it? And he just went like this. And he put it in front of my face and he didn't say anything and he didn't even look at me, really. So I had to read it. And when I read the bit, I just gave him such a big hug. I was so thrilled. And he said, that's the right reaction. I don't know what he really meant. I was just so delighted for him.
When he told us that they were going to make him a knight, we were just ecstatic. Apart from about time, but I think the whole nation said that.
Sir Kenneth Dodd, for services to entertainment and to charity.
I wrote a little ditty, actually. Who brings dollops of laughter to everyone's eyes? Who splits our sides again and again? Who lives on jam butties and black pudding pies? Who will leave the stage, but we don't know when? Who's a genius, tickly and wise, who never scores less than 12 out of 10? Who deserves that elusive prize? Who but dear Doddy of the Diddy Men? Arise, Sir Ken.
It was Prince William who knighted him. He was very honoured. He thought it was lovely. And it was a lovely ceremony. And I was so proud of him there. He looked lovely in his top hat and everything.
He was thrilled, he really was, to be honoured. And I do know, I think the thing that pleased him most is his mum would have been so proud of him. Sir Ken Dodd, it rings right, doesn't it?
Thanks for coming to the Army and Navy stores. That's great, the Army. Said to the manager, where's the camouflage jackets? He said, they're good, aren't they?
Ken kept performing his marathon stage shows right up to the end of December 2017. He was 90 by then, but his health was failing and it was a struggle. After a spell in hospital, Ken returned home to Knotty Ash, but he was very frail.
I brought him home to live. I put a stair lift in. I put rails around everywhere. Wonderful adjustable bed. Filled the house with all sorts of things that would make his life comfortable while he was getting better.
Ken and Anne had been engaged for 40 years, but had never got round to getting married.
He used to say, we'll get married sometime, you know, whatever. But apparently he had been talking to our vicar and asked if there was a way it could be done privately, very quietly.
I was aware that they were thinking about it. When you've been engaged to someone for 40 years, there is that suggestion that maybe you might get married.
I knew for quite a long time that marriage was in the offing. So it didn't come at all as a surprise to me when the invitation came. What could be better than be best man for your best friend?
A day or so before, a nurse frightened me to death by saying, No, I've seen this sort of stage and I didn't know what she meant. He hadn't been eating.
I was thinking about going to bed and the phone rang and it was Anne. She said, "Julia, can you come over, please? It's happening now."
Julia, Jess and the vicar came over, and Peter and Colette and 2 registrars. Licences were done, whatever paperwork was filled. Somehow it happened.
Ken had been quite quiet during the day, but when it came to the wedding vows, he suddenly perked up and he said them with energy and joy.
He said his vows, and I'm saying my vows. It was like a normal wedding ceremony. And we had a blessing afterwards, which was all very beautiful.
It was a civil marriage, but they very graciously asked me if I'd like to bless their rings and bless their marriage, so that was great, and then enjoyed a little glass of champagne afterwards.
It happened. Obviously, I'm very glad it did. I believe he was.
We phoned her one night and she said, "Oh, I've got a bit of news for you." "What's that?" She said, "We got married yesterday." Again, which was about 2 days before he died.
After he passed away, the city mourned him, immediately on a huge scale. Outside the house, it was like a shrine. People used to come from far and wide, 50 people at a time, just walking round, and they'd burst into tears. And this was very much a city in sorrow.
The people of Liverpool showed what they thought of Ken Dodd at his funeral. The love for that man.
Streets were lined with loyal Liverpool followers and fans, and it was rather like a state occasion.
There were people waving tickling sticks. There were people crying. There were people cheering. Everybody was applauding.
Tickling sticks were adorning the railings.
There must have been over 30,000 plus people lining the streets.
It was truly a remarkable occasion.
The cathedral was packed.
That cathedral holds, 3,000 people, and it was jammed full.
The service itself was absolutely superb. It overran. You would expect it to.
It was one of the most moving, marvellous funerals I've ever been to, full of laughs, which you would have absolutely loved.
The most abiding memory was actually at the end, when Happiness struck up on the organ and Ken was carried the length of the cathedral to tumultuous applause.
It was probably the biggest funeral Liverpool will ever see, certainly in my lifetime, but very fitting.
We were all there because we absolutely loved him.
It was for Doddy, our Ken.
A man who was still having fun, who was driving around the country with his best friend to theatres to make thousands of people laugh. And if you can be doing that your entire life,
The last of a generation, the last link back to music hall. His whole life covered the 20th century history of comedy. Very British, probably unexportable, but those who loved him absolutely adored him because he just spent his whole life wanting to make people happy. And he did.
The thing I'm most proud of is that he was still a normal person underneath with normal values, good values, and could talk to anybody.
The word is bandied about a lot, and it's bandied about unnecessarily, but he was a genius.
Theatrical geniuses on stage in my lifetime. One was Laurence Olivier and one was Ken Dodd. Theatre was where his genius was most apparent and most visible. I think he was one of the great theatre performers of my lifetime.
He was a Scouse hero. I loved him as a comic. He was just blessed. He was blessed.
He had been given this gift, and it was his responsibility to use this gift to spread happiness in the world. I think he really believed that.
He loved being up there. The fact that he carried on until he was 90 suggests that what he loved best of all to do in life was to stand on a stage and make people roll around laughing. Which is not a bad thing to do with your life, is it?
There was a newspaper article in one of these Sunday magazines. Different celebrities are asked the same questions, and one of the questions was, how would you like to be remembered? He brought laughter and happiness. that was his laughter and happiness.